The document came back across the table with a single word written in red ink at the top. Unverified. The bank's document examiner didn't look up when he slid it back. He simply said what he had been hired to say, what the bank needed him to say, what would make everything that came next feel legitimate and procedural and impossible to argue with. The signature on this deed cannot be confirmed as authentic. Without verification, the chain of title is broken. Without a clear chain of title, the claim of ownership cannot be sustained. He said it the way people say things when the conclusion was decided before the examination began. Raymond Cole sat across the table and looked at the document. His father's name was on that deed, written in the same hand Raymond had watched sign checks and letters and birthday cards for 40 years. The same deliberate, slightly forward-leaning script that James Cole had carried his entire life. Raymond knew that signature. He had known it since he was 6 years old. He said nothing. He picked up the document, folded it carefully, and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and looked at the examiner for just a moment. The examiner was already looking at his next file. Raymond walked out of the bank into the cold November air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He was 69 years old. He had been farming that land for 44 years. His father had farmed it for 31 years before that. 75 years of the same family on the same 200 acres of central Tennessee soil. And now a bank was telling him his father's signature was fake. He looked down at the pocket where he had placed the deed. Then he thought about something his father had said to him once, a long time ago. In a conversation Raymond had not thought about in years. He thought about it all the way home. And by the time he pulled into the driveway, he knew exactly where he needed to go. James Cole had been a careful man, in the specific way that men become careful when they have learned, usually through difficulty, that the world does not give things back once it has taken them. He had bought the land in 1949, 200 acres in Maury County, Tennessee, at an auction that most serious buyers had skipped because the soil had a reputation for being difficult. James Cole did not find difficult soil discouraging. He found it affordable. He spent the next 31 years proving that difficult and impossible were not the same thing. Raymond grew up in that proof. He was on the land before he was in school, working alongside his father, in the way that farm children work, not as a choice but as a fact of life, the way breathing is a fact of life. By the time he was old enough to understand what the farm meant, it already meant everything. James Cole died in 1980. He left Raymond two things: the land and a wooden box that sat on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, the one Raymond had been told his entire childhood never to touch. Inside the box, Raymond found the original 1949 deed, the purchase agreement, every property tax receipt going back to the first year, a letter from the county clerk's office confirming the recording of the deed, and at the bottom, beneath everything else, a sealed envelope with Raymond's name on it in his father's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a single page. His father had written it by hand, no date, no formal heading, just a page of careful instructions that began with 4 words: keep everything, trust nothing. Raymond had kept everything. For 44 years, he had maintained that box on the top shelf of his own closet, adding to it every year. Tax receipts, assessment notices, every letter the county had ever sent him regarding the property, every document connected to that land in any way. He had trusted nothing, which was why when Consolidated Rural Bank sent him a letter in October informing him that a review of regional property records had identified a potential discrepancy in the chain of title on his land, Raymond had not panicked. He had opened the wooden box and started reading. Consolidated Rural Bank had been expanding aggressively across Middle Tennessee for 3 years. The expansion had a particular method: identify rural properties with complicated or aging title histories, commission document reviews, find discrepancies, real or arguable, use those discrepancies to create legal uncertainty around ownership, then offer to resolve that uncertainty through acquisition, at prices well below market value, to owners who were too confused or too exhausted or too old to fight back. It had worked 17 times. The man leading the effort was a senior acquisitions officer named Marcus Webb, 42 years old, law degree from Tennessee, 5 years at Consolidated, a track record that the bank's leadership found impressive and that anyone on the receiving end of it found something else entirely. Webb had reviewed the Cole property personally, 200 acres in Maury County, Current assessed value, $2.9 million. Original deed from 1949, signed by James Cole and the selling party. Recorded with the county the same year. He had hired an independent document examiner named Phil Greer to review the signature on the original deed. Phil Greer had been doing document examination work for 11 years. He was not, in the traditional sense, independent. He had worked with Consolidated Rural Bank on 4 previous cases. He understood what kind of findings made the bank happy and what kind did not. His report took 6 days. His conclusion was what Marcus Webb needed it to be. The signature could not be verified as authentic. Webb called Raymond Cole and asked him to come in. Raymond came in. He sat across from Webb and Greer and listened to everything they said. Then he watched Greer slide the document back across the table with the word unverified written in red at the top. Raymond picked it up, folded it, put it in his pocket. Then he went home and opened the wooden box. He found it on the 3rd day of looking, not in the wooden box, in a folder inside a filing cabinet in the back room, one he hadn't opened in years. A folder his father had labeled simply County Records 1949, 1952. Inside was a copy of the original deed, a duplicate filed with the county at the time of purchase, standard procedure in Tennessee in 1949. And beside it, a letter from the Maury County Clerk's office dated November 3rd, 1949, confirming receipt and recording of the deed and certifying the signature of James Cole as witnessed and verified by the county clerk at the time of signing. Raymond read that letter twice. The county clerk who had witnessed and verified his father's signature in 1949 had signed the letter with his full name and official title. Raymond stared at that name for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and called his daughter Susan in Nashville. Susan was 45, a paralegal with a property law firm, quiet and precise in the way her grandfather had been quiet and precise. He read her the letter. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, do you know who that county clerk was?" Raymond said, "I think I might." Susan said, "His name is on the letter." Raymond said, "I know whose name is on the letter." Another silence. Susan said, "Dad, he's still alive. His name was William Tate. He was 94 years old, and he lived in a small house in Columbia, Tennessee, 12 miles from the land Raymond Cole had been farming for 44 years. William Tate had served as Maury County Clerk from 1947 to 1963. In that time, he had witnessed and certified thousands of property transactions. He had a memory, his family said, that had stayed sharper than his body, which had slowed considerably in the last few years, but had not stopped him from sitting in his chair by the window every morning and reading the newspaper front to back. Raymond drove to see him on a Thursday afternoon. He brought the letter, and the deed, and the wooden box, because he was his father's son, and he never went anywhere without the paper. William Tate looked at the letter for a long time. Then he looked at the deed. Then he looked at Raymond. He said, "Your father bought that land at the Hendricks auction." Raymond said, "Yes, sir." October 1949, cold morning. He was the only serious bidder. Tate paused. "I remember because he was young, younger than most men who came to me with a deed that size. I asked him if he understood what he was signing." Another pause. "He said he understood everything he signed." Raymond said nothing. Tate looked at the signature on the deed one more time. "That's his signature," he said. "I watched him write it. I certified it myself." He set the deed down. "Whoever told you otherwise was wrong or lying. And in my experience, when a bank tells you a signature is fake, it usually isn't the signature that's the problem." Raymond drove home with the letter, the deed, the wooden box, and something else. A signed statement from William Tate, 94 years old, former Maury County Clerk, confirming that he had personally witnessed and certified the signature of James Cole on the original 1949 deed. Her name was Dorothy Hines. 67 years old, Columbia, Tennessee, 32 years of property and title law. A woman who had spent 3 decades watching banks do exactly what Consolidated Rural Bank was doing, and had never once found it surprising. Raymond sat across from her the next morning and placed everything in her desk. The original deed, the county letter from 1949, William Tate's signed statement, the document examiner's report with unverified written in red at the top, and the wooden box, because Dorothy Hines was the kind of lawyer who wanted to see everything. She read for a long time without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. Phil Greer has done examination work for Consolidated Rural Bank 4 times in the last 3 years. She said it simply, without drama. Every time, his findings supported the bank's position. Raymond nodded. A 94-year-old former county clerk who personally witnessed the signature is not something they planned for. Raymond said, "No, I don't imagine they did." Dorothy picked up her pen. "Mr. Cole, what you have here is not just a defense against their claim. You have evidence of a fraudulent examination report commissioned by a bank for the purpose of manufacturing a title dispute on your land." She paused. "That is a significantly different thing." Raymond looked at the wooden box on her desk. "My father told me to keep everything and trust nothing." Dorothy looked at the box for a moment. Then she said, "Your father was a very wise man." She filed the response on a Monday morning. 44 pages, every document in order, the original deed, the 1949 county letter, William Tate's signed statement, a detailed analysis of Phil Greer's professional history with Consolidated Rural Bank, and a formal complaint to the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions alleging that the bank had commissioned a fraudulent document examination for the purpose of manufacturing a false title dispute. Consolidated Rural Bank received the filing on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus Webb had been placed on administrative leave. The hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in Maury County Circuit Court. Consolidated Rural Bank arrived with 4 lawyers. The senior partner, a man named George Ellis, had 30 years of property litigation behind him and a confidence that had not yet been fully adjusted by what had arrived in his inbox on Tuesday morning. Raymond arrived with Dorothy Hines and a wooden box. Judge Carol Reeves had been on the Maury County bench for 26 years. She had grown up in Columbia. She had known William Tate's name her entire life. When Dorothy submitted his signed statement into evidence, Judge Reeves read it carefully, then looked up. She said, "Is Mr. Tate available to testify?" Dorothy said, "He is, Your Honor. He is 94 years old and is offered to appear if the court requires it." Judge Reeves looked at the bank's table. "Counselor, your examiner concluded the signature could not be verified. You now have a signed statement from the county clerk who personally witnessed that signature in 1949. A pause. How does your client wish to proceed?" George Ellis adjusted his papers. He asked for a recess. Judge Reeves gave him 15 minutes. When the hearing resumed, Ellis stood and said that Consolidated Rural Bank was withdrawing its challenge to the chain of title on the Cole property. Judge Reeves looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "That is not sufficient, Counselor." Ellis paused. "Your client commissioned an examination report that this court finds to be inconsistent with available evidence. Your client used that report to initiate a legal challenge against a property owner's title. That conduct requires more than a withdrawal." She looked at the documents in front of her. "The challenge against the Cole property title is dismissed with prejudice." The court is referring the conduct of Consolidated Rural Bank and the examination work of Philip Greer to the Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions and the Tennessee Board of Forensic Document Examiners for formal review. Another pause, and the plaintiff is awarded full legal costs and damages in the amount of $186,000. She closed the file. George Ellis said nothing. At the bank's table, no one moved. Raymond gave one quiet nod. The same nod his father had given. The same nod that meant something was settled and didn't need to be discussed anymore. Consolidated Rural Bank paid the judgment in full within 30 days. $186,000. Marcus Webb did not return from administrative leave. Phil Greer's certification as a forensic document examiner was suspended pending review. The Tennessee Department of Financial Institutions opened a formal inquiry into Consolidated Rural Bank's acquisition practices across Middle Tennessee. 11 other property owners were contacted. 6 of them had received similar letters about their chain of title. 4 of them had already accepted settlements, giving up portions of their land at prices far below market value, believing the title disputes were real. Because of Raymond Cole, those settlements were now under review. Because one man had kept a wooden box on the top shelf of his closet for 44 years. Because one man's father had written 4 words on a piece of paper in 1980 and meant every one of them. Keep everything, trust nothing. Raymond drove home on the same road he had always driven, past the same fields his father had broken in 1949, past the same fence lines that had been there since before Raymond was born. Past the old barn where James Cole had spent 31 years proving that difficult and impossible were not the same thing. He parked in front of the farmhouse and sat for a moment. Then he took the wooden box from the seat beside him and carried it inside. He placed it back on the top shelf of the closet, where it had always been, where it would stay. Then he walked to the back of the property, past the equipment shed, past the creek his father had shown him how to read, to the old oak tree at the south edge of the land where James Cole was buried beneath a plain stone marker. He stood there in the November wind, looked at the stone for a long time, then said the only words that mattered. "I kept everything, Dad." A long silence. "Just like you told me. Some men leave money, some leave land. Some leave instructions written on a single page in careful handwriting, with no date and no formal heading." James Cole left all three. But what Raymond remembered, standing at that oak tree in the November wind, was not the land or the money, or even the instructions. It was the morning his father had handed him the wooden box and said 4 words that turned out to be the most valuable thing he ever owned. Keep everything. Trust nothing. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. We will see you tomorrow.